don't innovate on stuff that doesn't matter. Don't innovate on this stuff that's already solved. We've got to use our innovation juice, our quota of innovation, and we put it into something that is especially what we can do the best. And I think that's what we really get from this.
Welcome to Strictly From Nowhere, a podcast for tech founders by tech founders. Each episode explores the trials, tribulations, successes, and some comedy as we follow innovators and their journey from zero to market.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Strictly From Nowhere. I'm your host, Justin Abrams. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cause of a Kind. We build software and websites for you. You know, today's a special episode. It's not every episode. I'm sure, as you've seen, that I get to be joined by my best friend, co-founder, CTO, and chief architect here of Cause of a Kind, Mike Rispoli. What's up, brother? Thanks for joining, man.
What's up, man?
Having you here. Love having you here. You know, and we're also joined today by two other co-founders of a business that Mike and I have our eye on, that we've been aware of for some time. And I'd love to welcome Michael Bromley and David Höck. Welcome, fellas, co-founders of Vendure.io. You guys are building some incredible things in the headless e-commerce space. We're students of that space as well. We can't wait to learn from you guys. And so to get us kickstarted for today, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to give it to Mike Rispoli to get us started and give a little bit of an introduction, as you guys have seen this along the way. And before we get into business and the rest of that good stuff, sound good?
Let's go. Amazing.
Let's rock.
Amazing. So I'll start with my story of Vendure, how I first heard about it. I was working at the Not Worldwide, and we were evaluating e-commerce platforms. And I want to say this had to have been 6 years ago at this point,
Yeah,
5 or 6 years ago. And we were evaluating, and we were looking at Shopify, we were looking at BigCommerce, Magento, and it's so interesting because Magento kind of takes me way back to when I first started, and we kind of bailed on Magento because we were like, we don't know what's happening with this framework, and we looked at the SaaS providers, but then Vendure showed up. And you guys were like brand new then, and ultimately the Knot didn't make the decision to go with Vendure, but at the time I said, I want to watch this project because it's built in Node, it's using Nest.js, which is one of my favorite Node frameworks. We were all like really excited, and it was really the only, and I want to say you guys have emerged as kind of the only viable competitor in like the open source e-commerce space since, I want to say, Magento. There have been a lot of other, I remember Demandware back in the day, if you guys remember that was like a thing.
Absolutely.
But I thought it was so cool because I was always so surprised. I go, how is nobody improving this? And so I wanted to start with, where did you guys like finally, I kind of feel like, where'd you get the idea, and what made you say, I'm going to tackle this now? Because it is it's a huge space to go into.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can take that, because I think if you found it like 6 years ago, that was way back. And that was when it was like a one-man solo e-commerce project, right?
I wasn't even there.
This is like going back to the Stone Ages. And I guess I've got to be the one to answer that question of like, why do this? And I think the simple answer is because I didn't know what I was getting into at the time. And I think a lot of great things come from that kind of naivety, because you don't have those experiences that say, no, don't even bother, don't try it. And when you just have that mindset, you just think, yeah, why can't I do this? And then you just go and do things. And I think a lot of great things kind of start from that mentality. So like the actual background is that my family so I'm from the UK, I'm living in Austria now. And my family back home have a shop, an art materials shop. Okay, it's been going for 20, 25 years or so. And I was always building their website from my teenage years. That was always my like side thing that I've been doing like continuously and still do to this day. And like Vendure was born out of that classic scratching your own itch kind of thing. It was just like what you said. I was like looking around at some point in like 2017, and I was into like I had my own technology stack that I really like to use. I had architectural approaches that I thought made a lot of sense. By that time, I've been developing enough to develop my own sensibilities about what I think is good software, what's a good API, all this kind of thing. And I looked around, and just like you, I thought, wow, this doesn't exist. This is like a huge gap. And then, you come along with this naive approach and think, yeah, well, why can't I just build this? And that's basically the origin story of Vendure. the open source project part of it, at least.
That is so cool. And what made you go down the open source path as opposed to like trying to build another Shopify or something like that?
Yeah. Well, prior to starting Vendure, I did have some experience with open source projects. I had a few things upon GitHub that had like a little bit of traction here and there. And I enjoyed it. I enjoy the community aspect. I enjoy the kind of altruistic aspect. I enjoy the interaction. You know, I was like always this lone developer, and it was like my chance to actually interact with other developers and like learn things from them. So I did it because I believe in the model. I believe in open source as a model. I think it has benefits that go far beyond the code. It opened lots of doors for me personally in my career. This is how I ended up meeting David, and the rest of the story that we'll talk about. But yeah, I was just really into open source anyway.
Well, let's talk about how you met David, because David, you admit that you were not there in the beginning days. Maybe had you been, you might not even still be on the journey for today. So what was the impetus? It sounds like it was something with the open source project, but what attracted you to the project to the point where you were like, I want to help run the show here?
Yeah, my journey started a bit different with Vendure compared to Michael. I actually found Vendure out of my own need too. I was running an agency back then, basically the agency that then became shareholder in Vendure, the joint venture. And we were also building with Magento back then, and with Shopware and with these PHP-based e-commerce platforms. But I've recognized that it's really hard to hire good PHP developers that can write this or create these backend integrations with PHP, but then also have enough skills in the front end to work with these new frameworks, with React, with Tailwind, with all of the stuff that was coming up, like I would say almost 10 years ago. And that's why I said to my developers back then, look, we need to go out there and see what's available in this like JavaScript-based space, right? Because that's ultimately what makes this whole full stack approach work. You can have the same language on front end and back end, which is incredibly powerful and which boosts efficiency as a company, as an agency, because you don't have to need to maintain two teams that are completely separate, front end and back end, and then all the people complaining, back end has missed this and front end is doing bullshit on that area. It's always this back and forth. I hated that, to be honest. And that's why I like this full stack approach. And then we went out there and just looked through to GitHub basically and Googled, went that down. Back then it was even Googling. Now it's ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude, right? And then we found two open source frameworks or platforms, because open source was a must for us, just to look into the code, learning curve, and also make it viable for smaller companies to use it. And Vendure was one of them. And I'm a sales guy at the end of the day. I'm an engineer. I'm a software engineer, but I'm also the sales guy internally. So what I did is basically all of the developers said, this is such a great framework. It's the architecture, the APIs, everything's so beautiful. Like, this is so well done. But then I looked at the website and sorry, Michael, but it was so bad. And I thought, what? This is like a raw diamond. I just found this, right? And I always knew you can't sell an open source platform that is a one-man show to a business. Like, the owner or the CEO says, sorry, but what if this guy is not here tomorrow?
Right.
And dies?
Right.
Right. And that's when I reached out to Michael on LinkedIn in German, because I saw he's living in Vienna. So I thought, this guy should speak German, but I didn't know back then that he's from the UK. He speaks German, but not as good as he speaks English, of course. So
I will take that. I will take that.
Yeah, I'm pretty nice, But yeah, this is basically how the journey began. So I reached out to him, told him that we want to work with it, and just explored what he's up to, and then we basically met. I had my colleague with me, Max, who is also our business partner now. He's our COO, and he's also from the UK. I immediately saw, two guys from the UK. I would just let them deal with that stuff and I just tell Max what I want. And yeah, that's basically how it all started. And now we're here basically, fast forward a couple of years already.
Amazing. Let me ask you another double down question on what was the curiosity that caused you to go into the market to look for these types of tools? Can you tell me a little bit about what was happening in your agency climate? And the reason why I ask is because Mike and I are in a very similar position now. We're building our own solutions and scratching our own itches, but also looking to the market for creative projects that we want to participate in, both open source and not. And so I'm wondering if you could go back to that 2016, 2017 era, what was happening in the agency business that led you to look out to the market? Did you just want to serve your customers better? Were you looking for, advanced innovation or something totally different?
Yeah, so we found Vendure the first time, I think it was beginning of 2020, roughly. But this whole idea started, this whole idea of moving to a TypeScript Node.js based backend. I had this in mind already way earlier. I've started basically web development with PHP, so this was the framework that I loved. Not the framework, but the language, Laravel, Symfony, and all these things, right? But it was simply you couldn't find the type of developers you needed to deliver highly complex projects to an affordable price. Let's say it like that. Because money and a positive attitude solves every problem. Mm-hmm. But as an agency, you got to earn the money first, right? Before you spend it.
Yes.
That's right.
And even back then, companies started to cut costs and try to make these IT projects more affordable. Looked deeper into it, and then with 2020, with COVID, it of course spiked. But at first, when it started here in Europe, everyone was just, we need to look after our costs because we don't know what's happening now, right? So it was really primarily about efficiency, having one developer working on front end and the back end, and on a feature basis. So on work that is scoped to a feature and not only a part of a feature. And what I mean with that is, typically back then you had a backend developer building the database layer, entities, the API, etc. And then they passed it off to the front-end developer. The front-end developer took over, built the front-end, and shipped this part. And after that, basically the whole friction already began, right? Because nobody wanted to take responsibility. And I like this idea of I'm giving a developer the task of designing, building, and shipping a full feature where this person owns front-end and back-end and everything in between, basically, right? And that was the main driver for me, or the main trigger why I started looking into that space. And not even primarily headless, to be honest. Headless was a nice thing on the side to have it because of mobile apps and so on. But as it seemed, every Node.js-based e-commerce framework was headless suddenly. So there was no traditional monolithic framework back then.
Yeah.
That's true. I remember.
I got one more question for David before we move on. And before we get too far in the episode, tell me and tell the world that's watching, what is Vendure? In your words, as you would sell it to the world.
So Vendure is the enterprise e-commerce platform without the trade-offs that typical enterprise e-commerce platforms have. And what I mean with that is, typically enterprise e-commerce platforms are very expensive, first. Second, they are mostly built on a legacy stack. That means very hard to customize, very hard to extend. And they are also very rigid in how they think. They basically think in a way that their opinion as a software vendor matters more than your opinion as the one who uses it, right? And Vendure is basically a platform that gives you a very rich, out-of-the-box feature set, which is completely customizable from every angle you look at, basically. So we tend to say that you can basically switch core business logic safely. That means we have an opinion how a thing should look like, how pricing should look like or should work. But we know that your opinion or your know-how of your specific use case matters more than ours. So we built the whole platform, the whole underlying open source framework in a way that you can easily drop in your customizations into our core business logic without having to fear that everything explodes and that every change has 100 side effects, right? Mm-hmm. And Vendure brings the most value for companies where the business model is maybe not following the trivial standard business model of e-commerce companies. So thinking about like the classic Shopify store, right? Mm-hmm. Selling consumer goods or stuff like that, that is similar. It is more focused towards enterprise retail, B2B, multi-vendor, multi-seller business models that go off the standard way of thinking in e-commerce and do something special. And Vendure basically convinces companies to really build on an infrastructure they own themselves. They own the data. They own the business logic. They own the IP, essentially, and not just rent from someone else and then complain when suddenly the prices rise.
We've seen
and
it.
The margins are gone, right? So Vendure, TLDR, enterprise space, upmarket space, it's not meant to be used really by small businesses. Of course, we have a lot of small businesses that use our open source core framework, but the platform itself is targeted towards the complexity and the needs of bigger companies. And Mike already said it before, we kind of also think ourselves that we are kind of the successor of Magento, because we like to be in that space, in the enterprise space, in that mid-market space. And that's where Vendure shines, I think.
That's awesome. I was just going to say that I think that's because you talk about like a Shopify and what they're doing. Shopify is doing amazing things like with the Shop app. And I feel like for that direct to consumer space, that's like one type of e-commerce. But then going to when we were selecting at the Knot, one of the things that we had is we were doing a wedding invitations product, and they had purchased a company that was built on Drupal, if you can imagine that. That was like a pretty big disaster that it had to be migrated away. And one of the biggest things you run into is the variant limits of Shopify. It's like, at that time it was limited to 100. They've increased since then. And I think the ultimate went with BigCommerce because they had higher variant limits. But because you can't dig into how the database is structured at all, there's really no opportunity. So when like we were selecting, there was sort of this idea that, hey, once we make the selection, like you hit the upper limits of variance very, very quickly. And unfortunately, Vendure was so great because there was one other platform, and I wonder what the one you were thinking of, David, because at the time there was one built on Next.js too that we were looking at. And like my biggest worry about that was because I was like, Next.js is really great, deployed to Vercel. I don't want to say you can only deploy it to Vercel, but there were things I was thinking of like background jobs and queues and stacks and like all these things that e-commerce needs, which is where I saw the genius in choosing Nest. And at the time, people were like gaga over, it was either Next.js or there was like one person who was like psyched on Happy, which was like going through its own little thing. And we were like, wait, Happy's like about to implode. And I was like, I think this is the framework that we need to be on. And we did actually build like a pretty large middleware on Nest.js because of that. There's like all of these, e-commerce has so many needs that you don't realize at the enterprise scale. Like I think of an automotive manufacturer, for instance, that's like a unlimited variance, all these crazy things you could do. But there was one thing you guys did that I did, there was a pivot, which was the choice of AngularJS. And you had Michael, you made the pivot away to React. And I wanted to talk a little because I actually was like understood it because Nest.js and Angular conceptually on the front end and the back end are like the same. They're like cousins. But you had to make that switch. What ultimately drove that? Because I know you still love Angular.
Look at this
Probably
face.
still love Angular.
He's got something to say about this.
You mean me?
Yeah, I can see that smile.
Well, I think Michael didn't really trigger that decision or pushed it forward. I think that was me. Not particularly because I hate Angular. Absolutely not. I work with Angular too. I think it has its benefits for really large code bases where hundreds of developers are working on. But I always try to look through product through the lens of the customer, essentially, or the user, right? And the developer who builds on our platform is also a user. And what I've seen is that our dashboard back then, the Angular one, was already extensible, right? You could easily customize it and extend it, but it was just a pain. It was already painful for Angular developers. Now, Michael is a really good Angular developer, right? But even now he says, wow, that was so much work back then, and now it's basically 3 lines of code. But then put yourself in the position of someone, and you just said it, Next.js, they are dominating the space in terms of front-end storefronts and cloud deployments. To put yourself in the shoes of being a mid-level junior developer, working at an agency, working at a company, being tasked to build a storefront for Vendure. All your experience is React and Next.js. Well, there is no happy path for you with Angular. Simple as that. There is no way to work with Angular because the learning curve is so steep and it's so different to what you're used to. So I said to Michael, look, we got to switch. We need to have the same stack on the admin dashboard as most of the developers are using for their storefront, so that you remove this constant context switching and the completely different ways of working, the patterns and everything. And that's what ultimately drove the decision and made us switch from Angular to React. And also what also accelerated the decision was the rapid improvement of AI agents and LLMs, because I think without that, this wouldn't have been possible with the size of a team we are right now.
Yeah. And just to rewind a little bit about why was it Angular in the first place, it's nothing more complex than that advice of like when you're building something, you just use the stack you know, right? So it got us from 0 to 1, right? And it got us to the point where we were at. And, I'm thankful for that. But I do enjoy working on the React stuff now, I got to admit.
Well, it's so funny because Angular was going through like a little bit of a renaissance with the one, like I forget what version it was, but I was like looking at it. I said, "Oh, I love that. I love the switch statement." Like there were all these cool little things that it just never seemed to take off though. React is just like this beast that continues to plow forward, I think, and it's definitely a good decision because at the same time, everything we were working on at the Knot, most of the stuff we do here on the front end is all React. So it really is the kind of dominant stack. And I've kind of worked with, I feel like all the major ones anyway. We had Svelte projects, we've had Vue projects, we've had Angular projects, and ultimately I'm like React kind of just seems to bring everybody in at a certain point.
Yeah. And you also
I think at the end of the day, go ahead, Michael.
Okay. I was just going to say, there's this advice that's often repeated, which is like, use boring technology. You just use Postgres, just use SQL. And now really React has become the boring technology for front ends. It's just like something you don't need. And especially with LLMs, you literally don't even think about it now. You just say, I want this and this and this, and then it's React, and you don't really care that it's React, but it just is. And that's the way it is. And what I think I've learned from all this is like, don't innovate on stuff that doesn't matter. Don't innovate on this stuff that's already solved. We've got to use our innovation juice, our quota of innovation, and we put it into something that is especially what we can do the best. And I think that's what we really get from this.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I wanted to say, actually, that I think at the end of the day, it's all about ecosystem with these frameworks, right? And unfortunately, most companies have the constraint of budget. It's not like a Google or a Facebook, or like now called Meta, or these like Magnificent Seven, or these like big tech corporations that have unlimited money to spend. I mean, now they have way less money to spend because everything is going into AI infrastructure. But back then, as a developer, you could sit there and code a simple dialogue for like 4 weeks. And everyone was happy, right?
Yes.
But when you're an agency or a company that is building an e-commerce solution, you have mostly a fixed budget. There is a budget allocated, and you are one of many projects in the company. Like, you're not building software because that's what you do as like the main purpose of the business. You're just building software because you need it to succeed with your business model and with the change that is going on in this world, right? And I think that's why React is the far superior choice in that case, and I think for many other cases, because the ecosystem is so big, you can leverage so many things that have been solved, as Michael said, and you can put your brain, like your brain capacity and your AI tokens to much better use and to like focus on the 20% that actually set you apart and not on this ground level work that nobody even recognizes nowadays anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree. I find we've gone through the same. And one of the things I was even going to say, we mentioned Next.js. That's like one of my biggest criticisms of Next.js is that it feels like we've built with Next.js, I want to say for the last 9 years. And I don't think I've written the same code base 2 times in a row. But Nest, by comparison, has remained incredibly stable. And one of my favorite frameworks is Ruby on Rails. And it's like very similar in that regard where I'm like, look, Nest.js has stayed true to its basic core, and he's continued to add modules without saying, actually, we're going to make you change all the directory structure. Actually, we're going to do this whole new caching layer. And so that was one of the things that I think a lot of folks have to kind of separate React, which has been stable, from Next.js. And over the years, I feel like those two things have like combined. And now you're starting to see things like Vite and Handstack and like come out where they're like, if you liked the old React, like you could still do that. You don't have to, because that was one of my criticisms of if we had built an e-commerce platform on Next.js, you would have built you might have done like what I probably would have done was like Pages Router, TRPC, had this great like over the wire type ORM, which you guys are using. And then a year later, they're like, actually app directory. And like everything had to just like shift. And sometimes you're like, what did I really gain for that? And one of the things I love about what Nest has done over the years is it's just remained incredibly stable. So you guys can keep building your platform and not have to like reinvent the core structure of the whole thing. Those patterns still hold true.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to give a little shout out again to Angular here after we slightly bash it. We didn't bash it, but you know, one thing that I learned, because I was using Angular from like 2013 or something, from version 1.
Me too. I never forgave them for the switch to 2 though.
Trying to remember all that directive syntax. That was painful.
Yeah.
But one thing that it did really well was like just take tried and true software patterns and make it practical and bring that to like a whole generation. And I was like one of that generation, and like dependency injection and like modular design and why it's important to make things testable. And all that stuff came across, and like Camel put that stuff in Nest as well. And his whole module system, you know, the focus on testing and stuff like this. And then in turn, I took that and I brought it into Vendure as well. So yeah, I want to put that shout out there, because the reason why Nest doesn't need to change that much is because it just does things right. And it uses principles which are just basically timeless, and they don't need to change.
It is incredibly flexible, and I love the module pattern because I loved how testable it was. And at the time it was, I know why you maybe shied away from React too, because the React community was so big into functional programming. And if you told them that you enjoyed dependency injection, and I remember, Justin, I told like one of our mentors this, and they were just like, yeah, I thought they were going to burst into flames. And I was like, listen, I think it's a great way to test objects, and like the Gang of 4 book is still relevant. I'm just saying, if object-oriented sucked so much, why are so many people using it, you know? So it's like they definitely were not a big fan. Like the React community kind of went on this journey, because this was like the Redux time too, where that was very big. And I went on that journey too. I was doing the Elm, and I was like, oh, I'm going to learn Haskell, and then I kind of came back and I was like, you know what, like you were saying, David, when you build things for enterprises, I'm like, I got to go with some tried and true patterns that people have been doing for decades. I can't be selling in, you know, crazy technology to these people. It's going to be like all shifting all over the place.
Yeah, it could cost you your job at the end of the day.
It definitely has. Yeah, there's.
I mean, you need, at the end of the day, like, I think that's the biggest difference between Michael and myself. Michael really loves the craft of software development, right? He loves to write code. He loves to think about these patterns and architecture. For me, it's just a tool to achieve something. I don't really care about it that much. Like for me, this whole AI revolution now, I love it because there's nothing more. I hate to have an IDE open and to write these lines where I already know how the next 20 lines will have to look like. It's just a way of writing and typing and everything. I just want to spend my time thinking. And at the end of the day, every technology needs to serve a purpose, and it should serve that purpose with the least amount of cost and overhead and taking away your mental capacity as possible, right? And I think that's how Vendure is architected. Vendure, if you compare it to many other open source players out there, we are, sorry to say that, we are boring. We are not hyping we release our versions, we ship them minor versions, we ship them patch versions, but there's nothing exciting about them. Yeah, there's a new feature here, there's a new feature there, but we are not having a full revolution with every major version. And why? Because first, it's not necessary. Our tool serves a purpose and it needs to do one job and needs to do that well, right? And secondly, you can't ship good software, and I think that's where Next.js comes into this whole space. You can't improve software over years and years when you change your approach and your mental model every year, basically. And I totally feel you when you say that working with Next.js is a struggle, because I feel the same way. I work a lot with Next.js actually on a daily basis, and they have so many opinions about everything, but in so many cases, I just think, does this really serve a purpose? Or is it just to create something new, that there's new marketing content to be produced, right? Or a new hype, a new trend to be triggered there? What's the real purpose behind it? And I think Vendure, on the other hand, is on purpose boring, because we just want to give you the best enterprise e-commerce platform that's available. Simple as that. We don't care if we have the most exciting features, the most exciting AI storefront builder, the most exciting architecture. We don't care, because at the end of the day, what counts is developers using our platform and reporting, wow, I never had such a frictionless and smooth developer experience as with Vendure. That's all we need. That's our confirmation. It's not reposts on Twitter, it's not reposts on LinkedIn, and it's not producing a hype every 2 months. That's not what we care about. And yeah, I think that really is something that was unfortunately lost in the software engineering space, I think, because every framework maintainer or maintainer's team or company behind frameworks or platforms, they always try to innovate on stuff that's completely useless at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like your developers, let's put Next.js as an example, this whole caching topic, right? That is going on for years right now in Next.js. Just this mental model of caching. I think we're at the 5th or 4th iteration now of how caching should work. And every time it's named, that's the new standard how caching should be done.
Yes.
You know, caching at the end of the day is our 4 HTTP headers and a CDN. Or a Redis on the backend. That's caching essentially. Everything around it is just marketing buzz and made up BS, to be honest. And yeah, we are intentionally boring. I think that's really important. For me, it's really important to say that, because I feel that so many developers jump on the bandwagon of using the most hype up, latest, spiciest, fanciest stuff, pitch that to their boss or to their manager, get the okay, use it, and then getting brutally burned and fired because it backfired, because it wasn't pedal tested, right? And I've seen it a lot of times already. So if developers are currently listening to this episode and trying to pitch something that's extremely fancy, extremely modern, and pre-version 1 maybe, don't do it because could cost you your job.
Let me ask you a question. This is a business level question, but it kind of comes back to what you've both been talking about, which is like choose what you're comfortable in when you're creating. And I just want to bring this back to what our audience really is. Our audience is on various trajectories of entrepreneurship, various trajectories of building new technology or adopting old technology and trying to innovate on those things. There's a big difference between the two projects that you're talking about, Vendure and the Next.js project, and one of those has to do with capital and where that money comes from and who your stakeholders are and who you have to answer to. And there's a very big separation between those two businesses. I'm not going to color this in, but I would love for one of you to, what happens for anybody out there that is trying to think about owning their future and think about the purpose-led building versus marketing-led building versus, filling your P&L, finding your next investor, God forbid, going public and maintaining shareholder value. That's one way. You guys went a different way. So from a business level perspective, just to educate folks that are trying to figure out what's my path, what's my play, money is a critical tool. Yeah, sometimes it's also the cancer in the equation as well. So I'd love you guys to take a little bit of a business focus on it right now. How has your model empowered your growth?
I think I would like to get Michael's opinion first, actually, because you're the CTO in our case, in our company here. So I would be interested in your opinion now, and then I will follow up.
Okay. So I'm gonna just take it back to like the beginning. So when I started this whole thing as an open source project, I did have this vague idea that I can somehow monetize this because I like doing it. I like building this stuff, and wouldn't it be cool if I could just do this for my job? So and I was really back then into this whole indie hacker scene, right? I don't know if you know this. Maybe it's still there. The indie hacker website.
Yep.
From the Channing Allen, I think it was who did that. And you can share your Stripe stats and stuff. I was kind of into that mentality. I'm gonna indie hack my way to like sustainability and like lifestyle business, this kind of thing. That was like my kind of whole attitude. But I was coming from purely like the developer mindset, and what I've seen over the years is the developer mindset is very, very far from the business mindset, and kind of bridging that gap is quite challenging. But I think I've been on my own journey over the past few years since meeting David, kind of making the transition from like pure engineering kind of mindset to somewhere in the middle, kind of more towards the business side now, appreciating the different concerns, the different constraints, the different goals. Yeah, so that was where I came from, and I think at some point we kind of intersected, and then we went together on this journey of like, actually, how do we even make money off open source? This is really difficult. What are we even doing here? We're just giving our stuff away. And then the challenge became like, how do we actually crack this? And I don't know. I think maybe I would feed into your kind of story here, because we then went on this whole thing about capital and fundraising and stuff. And that was quite an interesting little episode we had a couple of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2024, I think it was 2024. 2024, we thought we need to go and raise money, because we were contacted by, I would say on average, 10 to 20 VCs a month. And I had the conversations with them. It was nice. Everyone was talking, oh yeah, we could invest this amount of money and do that together and blah, 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 Then we said, okay, let's go. So I went on this journey, had all these calls. We got a few term sheets. At the end of the day, we said, no, we don't do it. And the reason was because we started out doing this whole process with saying we have some ways of working that we just want to keep forever, right? And over the process, like over a few months where you are having these conversations with VCs and going to the first round and second round, blah, 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 then we started bending our vision of the product, of the company to fit the narrative, what the VCs want to hear. And it would have been possible to get the money, but at the end of the day, what's the cost involved? The cost is that you end up with a business that's well-funded for a couple months, let's say 12, 16, 18 months, but the vision of the company is not aligned with the vision that you have anymore. So the logical consequence is that the founders split up and the company is going to bust in many, many cases. That's actually, I think, the number one reason why investments fail, because founders can't work together anymore or can't work in this company anymore. So we turned it down and we said, okay, we are playing this game on hard mode now, level 90 out of 100. I think because you said, Justin, the audience are entrepreneurs in different stages of the journey. I think money is a tool, definitely. So money is, on one hand, opening a lot of doors, opening up a lot of opportunities, but it's also a liability, not against the company itself, but I think for your personal vision of how the company is going. Because when you're bootstrapped right now, for example, we have no debt, we have no investors, we have only ourselves who we need to be reporting to. And if we would say tomorrow, look, this company is not where we want it to be, we can just change it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have money in the company and external investors, they're going to dictate a lot how the company should work. And then suddenly your position of being in the driver's seat changes more to be the one on the passenger seat, reporting to the one in the driver's seat, right? And of course, with Vendure, we are open source and at the core. We have our commercial product. And yes, it's hard. It's really hard to build this company. I can tell you, I'm on the front line. I'm trying to grow it to grow even more and become an even more successful company. But I know I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it for Michael. I'm doing it for the team. And there are only 3 shareholders. And that's it. I don't need to report to some VC guy somewhere in New York that doesn't really care about my company at all, just follows rules of the company where he's working, right? So I think if you want to do something for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, don't take external cash until you can dictate the terms and conditions. If you want to do something very fast, sell it in a couple years, 7 years, and you don't want it to be your main purpose of life, then getting VC or getting capital is fine. But I think at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself the question, I'm working 60, 70, 80 hours at the beginning, every week, to build this company. So most of your life, at this stage of your life, is going into the company. Who do you want to work for? Yourself or someone else? I think that's the only question you need to ask yourself. And Mike and I, and also Max, the last few years, we often discussed, like we had LinkedIn open, we scrolled through the feed, and we saw our competitors posting, oh, we raised another 10 million or 5 million, or posted, we hired another 5 people. And yeah, we were kind of jealous. We were kind of pissed that we couldn't do it. But now we're profitable. We have real customers. We have solved a real problem for these customers. They are happy to pay us. And the competitors are still trying to find a way to actually make money after their third pivot.
Yep.
So I think that's a different mentality. You need to be disciplined enough to go through the hard phase. And it will always be hard. Don't believe anyone who says it will get better. No, it will always stay hard because capital is always constraining a business, always, or working capital. It's just more exciting when you win then. Like at the end of the day, when you're on a winning lane and you see your competitors still trying to figure out to actually make money and not just burn money, that's a damn good feeling, to be honest.
I totally agree. I feel like I post about this topic a lot because sometimes I say, am I coming off as jealous? Because I mean, I remember a few years ago when we were a younger agency being at Disney with my family, and I feel like we did not have enough money in the bank to make payroll. And like I'm thinking, here I am trying to focus on vacation, but I'm like building stuff at night because I'm trying to get this thing done so we can get the next check in the door to make. And I'm thinking to myself, man, wouldn't it be great if someone just wrote me a check for $1 million and like I didn't have to worry about the cash. And then I see even posts now. Someone yesterday had this post that was like, one engineer at Vercel used $10,000 worth of tokens in a day. And they were like, this is an amazing thing. And I go, dude, if I woke up tomorrow and my engineer told me that they spent $10,000 in tokens in a day, I would have an absolute heart attack. I would be like, did everybody do that? Like I was, like most businesses cannot just burn the whole backlog. Like you actually have to have a thing called cash flow that all these other businesses just live outside of. And you kind of get a little jealous that you're like, there's a whole part of business that they're just not playing because they don't care. They just have all the cash that they want to burn. And you're very in this like, hey, I have to remain profitable. But then you talk about the piece of when you get to the other side and you are profitable and you have the sustainable income. And yes, you still have ups and downs. We still have ups and downs because this was like the thing I wanted to get to you guys here, bringing it full circle, is you had an agency and pivoted into Vendure. And one of the things that I think that is a struggle for us and a lot of the agency owners that watch our show talk about this, the boom and bust cycle, the constant like finish a project, have to find another one, finish a project, have to find another one. So how has the transition from agency to Vendure been? Was that like a breath of fresh air? Like, were you guys like, yes, we're finally doing the thing? Is there still boom and bust in the Vendure story now? Like, how are you guys kind of working through that?
I wouldn't say there's a boom and bust anymore, but I don't think there ever was, to be honest, because we have never been just another software agency. We always had a clear focus as an agency on complex B2B e-commerce projects, always, right? So we didn't have these problems of trying to find the next generic software project to get revenue. Because once you've built and solved problems for 3-4 serious companies, you have actually something to show. And the 5th and 6th and 7th company have the exact same problems. So we were going in there and said, look, we have solved everything you need to solve, and we can do it for you too, right? So I think it's a niche. It's always about niching down. Right now, it's the transition, I think, went well. We have kept some strategic relationships with some great customers that we have been working together for quite a while, and like a services agreement kind of, way of working together. But other than that, we are a full product company now. So we just said, we're going to stop doing what we did in many, many areas of the business, and we just go all in. The chances are, realistically, being 100% honest, 50-50 if we are still here in 2027. Why? Because we went all in. Do we believe that we succeed? Yes. But there's always a risk. Like if there is no 50-50 chance, you didn't go all in, as simple as that. Then you still have the handbrake on. Like you're still driving with the brakes on, and that's not good. For me, the focus is clear. There's so much more clarity now in terms of go-to-market, in terms of who we're going to sell to, what is the problem that we're going to solve, and how do we position ourselves in the market. That's always what I've missed before, because we always had like this product versus agency. What are you guys? Now I know spot on who I need to hunt down, who I need to close, and who I need to make happy at the end of the day. And that's from the strategic sales side, but I think Michael can also share a bit about like the technological side, because I think there's also much more clarity now.
Yeah. But it's almost like one of these fateful stories where in a movie, everything's been leading up to this moment, right? Because our team has been working with Vendure now for years on these most challenging, complex, gnarly, enterprise projects with like the most awful legacy, COBOL, whatever backends. And we figured out how to make that work, right? And these are lessons that you just cannot exchange that for any amount of money, that experience of learning that. And our team has that now. And now we can redirect all of that experience into the product itself. And now we really see it, like the stuff that we're building right now, the velocity we're building, and the kind of expertise and care that we can bring to it is like, it's amazing. I was with one of our developers today. He was demoing through one of the new features that we're shipping soon. And I was literally like in the call, I was like, wait a minute, this just works so well. It's just designed so well. I was kind of blown away by it. And it's one of those things like, it seems easy, right? After you've been doing it for like 10 years and you put in all that work. And we're very much kind of, from the technical side, it feels like we've arrived at this point where we can now do that. It also ties into the whole AI thing, right? We can leverage AI without producing slop now, because we know what it's supposed to look like, because we've developed these scents, we've developed the patterns, we've developed this whole experience around it. So yeah, it's also been a very, I would say, really nice transition.
It's so interesting you think about, because for a long time when we got into business, I always felt like the pinnacle was the day you sold your company, or the day you IPO'd, the day you exited, made this big fat check. And sometimes now, like after running the agency for many years, and what I'm hearing from you guys too, is the real pinnacle is when you get to focus on the niche that you're passionate about. And like, as long as the journey takes now, it's great, because you guys transition from working on all these different projects and figuring all that out to like, Vendure is now alive and we're all in, and we can, and especially with AI, I find myself, and I say this all the time, where like I'm working on all these different things and it's amazing. But sometimes I just want to be able to I just want to focus on one thing today. And I like feel like that's like a very hard, it's such a rare space now to occupy, where you're like, I can just focus on this thing and sink all my energy into it, because it's so easy to work on 100 things at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing now with this, after this transition, is that AI is a multiplier for us. It's a true accelerator. And before, like being an agency, being a service-based business, I saw it more as a threat to our business model. And I think that increased since then by a lot. I think this whole business model of, I give you this piece of work and you bill me by the hour, I think this concept is disrupted. I think there needs to be something else. I don't know what it is, but if you follow this model of doing business together, why should the other person maximize the use of AI? If I can ship something in 8 hours and I bill 8 hours, or I ship something in 3 hours with AI, but then I can also just bill 3 hours, what I'm going to do as a service-based business? For sure, the first one. I want to bill as a
by the token.
Maybe.
$10,000 in tokens, right? My customer would be like, yeah, but it only took an hour. I'd be like, but it took $10,000.
Exactly. That's what I mean. It's so hard to, I think there's so much disruption and change going on in the service industry right now, or will be, that I'm just happy that we stepped out of that whole zone. We are on the vendor side now. For us, AI is a huge multiplier. What we are shipping in a week now is mind-blowing. We have built in 3 months a serious competitor to commerce tools, to Spryker, to SAP Commerce on a feature parity level.
Wow.
The great thing, all of these features are with the same mental model that the Vendure core follows. So it's all of them are fully customizable, not rigid, not built in a way that you can't change anything. No, everything's changeable, but you have so many more features out of the box. If you would have asked me 2 years ago if that would be possible as a bootstrap business, I would have said, are you dreaming or are you on drugs? Either one of both, right? So for us, AI is a huge, huge accelerator. And for our partners, our agency partners, it's definitely something else. And they need to figure out what they do. But I think as long as you stay on top of everything, try to be following the latest trends and what's going on, and not forgetting about the skills that are actually necessary to sell something, which is not the actual coding, but solving a problem, then everything else becomes just the tools that you use. And you will always have something to sell because you have a skill, because you're solving problems. And Yeah, I think that's also a very positive thing after this transition, that I don't need to care about that anymore. What's going to happen in the service industry, because we're no service-based business anymore. And that's a nice side effect of that whole transition. So it's absolutely worth it going all in and having a huge risk. The 50-50 that I said before, of course it's not 50-50. We know, based on inbound flow, based on the companies we're talking with, that we found product market fit. But at the end of the day, you never know, right? You went all in. There could always be something you haven't thought about. But I personally love that, because risk at the end of the day is fuel. And you go in the morning into the office and just think, if I'm not delivering now for a week, I could be walking into this office the last time end of this year, right? And this mentality drives so much in our company right now. I think Michael can confirm it or deny it, I don't know. But this state of urgency and having brutal ownership and really being in hardcore building mode right now is really pushing the limits. And I'm so happy, like in a few weeks, we'll announce all the features that we've built in the new Vendure platform product. And you will be amazed if you now know that this basically took 3 months. Of course, learning all the hard bits and pieces, how it needs to be solved, took years and years of experience. But the actual building of the software took a couple months. And I think that's also for everyone out there who is thinking about building a software product or starting a software business or anything like that. End of the day, if you have solved a problem for a lot of companies in a kind of similar way, you can now build a profitable software company, because you have the skill, you have the knowledge on how to solve a problem. You just need to translate it into software, and that's it. So the opportunity is massive right now, I think.
I find the wisdom to actually be really timely, not only for us, Michael and I we're so anxious to have a conversation with you, because it's part of our journey too. It's a contemplation that we have, watching the transition in the service industry and how to make our model, which is different from every other service business's model, survive and excel and find a new normal and a new echelon towards our goals. It's we talk about this quite often. It's called the Red Queen effect. We find that we are running as fast as we possibly can to simply stay in the same place, and that can be quite maddening. And we're classic builders. We build things just because we want to see them exist in the world, and any one of those things has an opportunity to live. And I think that is great wisdom and great energy for anybody that is watching this. Is build from a place of passion and curiosity. Build from a place of service to yourself, service to your small community. We love that we got into business as a service business. I'm sure you'd be fond of your old business too. It's just a way of entering into entrepreneurship and being valuable and working on hard problems and making a great network. And there are such benefits of building in a service-based business.
Absolutely.
But there is also just such wisdom in finding a product and finding a business model that has infinite scalability, that solves a true niched purpose. And I love the wisdom that you guys were both able to drop on us today. And so as we round third base, I want to thank both of you from the other side of the world for joining us. Mike and I appreciate you so much. We're students of what you're building. I can't wait to see what you guys drop in that product elevation newsletter in the next couple of weeks. And as I always do, I wish you both and Vendure forward to extraordinary.
Thank you so much for having us on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.